Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar on risk appetite and tolerance. We have guests from around the world joining us today. So we have people dialing in, I know, from the likes of Africa, Europe and North America. We also have some esteemed guests in the room here as well. Welcome everybody. So my name is Ollie. I'm a software lead at Satarla, and this is my colleague, Dr. Sarah Gordon, who's the CEO at Satarla. Quick word on Satarla. We are a risk management consultancy firm. We have offices in London, Johannesburg and Sydney, but we also have associates based around the world. We specialise in the enterprise-wide integrated management of risk. We deliver services in training, consultancy and research across the globe to clients. And also joining us on the line, we have John Castner, who's dialing in remotely from Atlanta in North America. And John is the Managing Director for Isometrix in North America. Just a quick note on Isometrix, they're one of the world's leading developers for integrated risk management software, and it's used by some of the biggest brands in extractives, so like mining, energy, manufacturing, over the last couple of decades, and they have offices as well in the USA, Canada, Australia and South Africa. So without further ado, we will dive into the content of today, and the first question we have posed is, what is the difference between risk appetite and tolerance? So please, Sarah, if you could address.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ollie, and thank you very much, everyone, for having us here today. So the difference between risk appetite and tolerance, there are many different approaches to this, and actually what you tend to find is that every organisation tends to define risk appetite and tolerance in a different way. However, the official definition behind this that you generally find in international definitions looks at risk appetite being the amount of risk that you are willing to take as a part of your organisational activities, and risk tolerance is the amount of risk that you can take. So your risk tolerance, there's a little bit of wiggle room here around about that risk appetite, which allows you to be a bit flexible in terms of the risks that you want to take.
Brilliant. So I'm hearing that there's not only there's a difference between risk appetite and tolerance there. So risk appetite kind of sets your level of where you want to be. The tolerance is kind of building in a different set of thresholds.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something here where, as you can see on the screen, is often organisations will think about their risk universe as a whole. So those might be all of the risks that you could face as an organisation. Within that, there'll be a zone of risk appetite. So those are the risks that you're willing to take. Around that, there'll be a zone of risk tolerance, those risks that you can take. And at the edge of that risk tolerance zone is often your risk capacity, okay? And what you have here on the screen is just a little diagram that comes from the Institute of Risk Management, and so a bit of background review for you if you want to know more.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So we've understood our concepts, we've operationalised them now. So how do people really put those concepts into practice? What do people do with them? Where do people use them?
So people use risk appetite and tolerance almost as a trigger point. So to be able to say, okay, so here's our objective. Around that objective, we want that wiggle room, but how much risk is too much risk? Okay, and so at what point in time do we maybe need to escalate decision making to different points in the organisation? And that's where appetite and tolerance can really help. Also as well, if we're trying to drive different forms of risk culture within the organisation as a whole, actually setting a very narrow tolerance is a bit more command and control, whereas a broader amount of risk tolerance, that actually gives a bit more of an entrepreneurial spirit as a whole, so that we can actually give people a bit more space to make those decisions where they want to.
Great, thank you. So just kind of building on that there, we sort of talked about the concept of risk appetite, but how can we, we're working today with a technology organisation as well, and I'm just wondering, are there any sort of tools out there that can help us? So John, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ollie, and thanks as well again to everybody who dialed in. I know there's a big soccer game that's going to start here in a little bit, so go USA. So yeah, I think if we really think about it, and this is the feedback that we get from our customers, obviously we are a software company and we engage with companies across the globe in a variety of different industries, and the most common technology tool that we often run into is Microsoft Excel and spreadsheets. And that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, I think you think about the way technology has evolved over the years. Microsoft came out with this fantastic thing called Excel. many, many years ago, and people figured out and became experts in how to leverage that technology tool to do all kinds of different things. And so, A, it's probably sort of the longest tenured technology tool around. B, people use it for a lot of different things. People use it for personal stuff. So it's easy to use, it's familiar. But as you start to get into the concept of enterprise risk and enterprise risk management, and you start looking at consolidating and centralizing risk across your organization, that's where a tool like Microsoft Excel tends to fall down. So, I think the other place that it tends to fall down is related to the data and the analytics that come out of it. And there's all kinds of great graphs and charts that you can do within a single Excel tool. But when you want to consolidate multiple Excel spreadsheets from multiple parts of your business, from multiple locations, that's not really an exercise to undertake. So certainly that is probably the main tool, and there's advantages and disadvantages of that. There's obviously an ever-growing suite and selection of risk management software solutions that are available on the market today. So third-party software products or third-party software companies like Isometrix, who have spent a lot of time trying to digitize risk management. And I'd say for the most part with the aim of creating a place to singularly centralize all of the information related to risk and then be able to analyze that risk on an ongoing basis, potentially in real time or near real time. So, I think the reality of it is, as those of you who may be on maybe you're using a technology tool, maybe you're on an exploratory journey to consider technology tools that are out there. I'd say there's sort of a common tenets that you want to look at, right? And when we're talking about risk appetite and tolerance, you can see there, really what a technology tool can do is provide you with templates to enable the recording and reporting of information, particularly the results of your decisions and your risk appetite monitoring that fits into your executive and governance structures. And that's really the benefit of the tool, right? Do I have a central place where I can record, report, and monitor on my risk appetite and tolerance? Okay. As you work through that, of course, another way to maybe think of this is that as you develop your risk appetite statements, certainly they need to include the ability to support the ongoing monitoring of risks, again, made a lot simpler with a technology tool. You can then leverage that information to guide decision-making process. You can look at the data that is captured, the monitoring, the reports, and the recording, and use that to act as an early warning detection process. And then furthermore, I think the final bit there is that you can define your key risk indicators, and you can try to align them with this concept of, are they scalable, but the way a technology tool comes into play is, are they measurable and are they actionable? So one of the number one tools about risk management is being able to action the information that you have available to you. And again, technology tools can really help with that as well. Thanks, Ollie and Sarah. I guess just as a quick glimpse again, specifically of how Isometrix might do that, we talked about the KRIs and the monitoring. As an example, many software tools, not just Isometrix, have a dashboarding solution where you can see, as an example, you can sort of plot your appetite versus tolerance, very similar to the graph that Sarah showed a couple of slides ago. And then, being able to click on each of those particular segments and slice and dice and sort that, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. You can see the bottom part of that looks very much like a left to right Excel spreadsheet, except because it's in a database, it allows you to dig a little bit deeper and start to make maybe some more connections across your business.
Great, John. Thank you very much for that summary, high-level getting risk appetite, not only the technologies, but a wider overview of the technology solutions at hand. And it kind of touched on some of the conversations we had here last week around various different questions you may have with technology solutions, which is another webinar series that we have available online. So bring it back to risk appetite, Sarah. Mm-hmm. How would you, in your experience, set risk appetite and tolerance for an organization?
So I think, thank you very much, Ollie. So John, just to follow on from your parting shot, as it were, with regards to should I say football, given that we're currently sitting here in England, so despite being Scottish, go England tonight. So with regards to actually establishing what we think our risk appetite and tolerance might be for an organisation, and to take that soccer or that football analogy. So tonight, for the English women's football team, our best case scenario would be that, to be honest, America doesn't even bother to turn up, and so we win by default. The worst case scenario is that the Americans score lots and lots of goals and we seriously embarrass ourselves and it's a disaster. Our risk appetite, of course, is to win that match within 90 minutes. Okay, so let's face it, we actually, whilst we love the best case scenario, actually we quite want to play a fair game of soccer or football and win fair and square. Our risk tolerance, okay, or our risk capacity is losing that match, okay, as a whole. Now, the difference between the risk appetite and the risk tolerance, and John, this talks to your key risk indicators as well, is that ideally we win that match in the 90 minutes, okay? We will tolerate, however, going into extra time and even going into penalties. Not that any British person likes penalties at all, because we don't have a very good track record with them. If, of course, we lose that game, that goes beyond our capacity, because it means that we go out of the World Cup, and so therefore we haven't managed to achieve our objective as a whole. So what you can see here is, if we take it back to that original diagram as well, obviously we want to win that game within the 90 minutes fair and square. We will tolerate going to things like extra time and penalties, but we won't tolerate losing the match. Is that okay with you, John?
I suppose so, yeah.
I think we're violently agreeing in the room here. Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. So just to move the conversation on a little bit here, how do we as risk practitioners and risk managers out there, I know there are a lot of risk managers both in the room here and dialed in today, how would we use risk appetite to really guide decision making within our organisations?
I guess you're turning it back over to me. Thanks very much. So I'm going to give a very specific example of that. And that specific example is in the it's in the agricultural world, and it's a specific example of an Isometrix customer, a company called Senvez. So Senvez they're focused on providing safe, available food to consumers. The Senvez group is comprised of 3 pillars: input supply, financial and technical services, and then market access. So they've been around for about 108 years, and what they have done over the course of many, many years, and they were very similar, as you can see on the objective, they're a very similar profile as probably many of you, in that they replaced a spreadsheet-based system with a centralized electronic system that would provide real-time risk assessment information across their businesses, not just from an enterprise risk perspective, but maybe to get to a question that was just asked in the panel from one of the panelists, but also around health, safety, and environment. So what they did is they look at the health, safety, and environmental aspects of what they do the same way they look at financial risks, market risks, political risks, weather and environmental risks, and really try to break that down to a common sort of way of measuring information. Now, they happen to do that across 22 risk categories. So health and safety, access to safe food, kind of all falls into their broader risk structure. I would say, to again address the specific question that was answered, you are correct. Most companies take their HSE risk sort of profile and matrix and they try to silo it. The reason why Satarla is sitting here speaking to you in conjunction with Isometrix, and the reason why we're presenting a case study like Senvez, is we try to focus on companies and customers and help them take a truly integrated risk perspective. What does that mean? It means that everything you do has some impact somewhere in your business. From the very top level, from an executive level, the people who, the shareholders, the CEOs, the CFOs, they obviously care about the bottom line. But companies who truly take an integrated risk and compliance mindset, integrated risk in particular in this case, they recognize that health, safety, environment, social sustainability are another key risk category on which to look at their risk appetite and tolerance, and they include that in their overall sort of enterprise risk management scenario. Okay? So look, I think a lot of this depends upon maturity of your organization. Senvez obviously made a big leap in the way that they were doing these things, but they saw the value of that from an enterprise risk management perspective. And ultimately, the key thing here was that they turned to that information. Remember, I said it needs to be measurable and it needs to be actionable. So because they were able to get together and break that down and categorize it, they were able to quantify all of these different items and quantify that across all of these different drivers and risk indicators that they have. And since it's all centralized now, instead of being spread across 3 separate business units in hundreds of different sites, it was all centralized for them to be able to manage that a bit more easily. So that's just a specific case example. You could apply that to a mining company, an oil and gas company, a manufacturing company, a logistics company. In this case, it was focused on an agricultural company.
I think, Ollie, if I may just sort of build on what John's saying as well, because I totally agree with you, John, in terms of in a perfect world, all of that information, it would be measurable, quantifiable, etc. But actually, whilst you have a lot of that data that exists, often you also have information that you can't quite put your finger on what might the number be. So this is where all the qualitative risk information comes in. And something that I personally really like about risk appetite and tolerance is this is where you can begin to say, okay, from a values perspective, so when people are talking about health and safety or doing the right thing from an organisation perspective, and I think certainly every organisation that's sitting around this virtual table will have similar types of values, is about saying, okay, actually, what are those tolerable limits with regards to those values as a whole, and especially when you want to balance profit-making activities with some of the more sustainability type values that might be less easy to quantify as a whole. That's where you can use risk appetite and tolerance to actually hold your organisation to account in an integrated style.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, John. I'm hearing a lot of different comments here, qualitative, quantitative approaches, tangible and non-tangible aspects of risk management there. So good conversation, thank you. Let's just move it on a little bit here, and let's talk about what do you do if you find yourself outside of those tolerance limits? What would you do as an organisation?
Yeah, so this is something here where this really takes us very neatly into the control space. And so again, coming back to our circular diagram again, what happens if you find yourself outside of your risk tolerance? Well, it means one of two things. Either you need to do something very, very quickly to get back into your zone of tolerance again, because otherwise everything's going to go wrong, and that means your company is either going to go bust or you will need to change your strategy very fast. Or it means that you've been too conservative with where that risk capacity or the edge of your risk tolerance actually sits. Now, if we assume that we've actually set our risk tolerance correctly, that means we have to go into the world of controls. And from a personal perspective, so my background is I'm originally a geologist, and so I grew up, as it were, in the mining sector, but I've had the luxury of working across a whole myriad of different organisations, especially over the last 5 years or so. And this little flowchart that you have in front of you, I find works really, really well to help people get into that control space. So for a control to be a true control, it actively has to change that risk, okay? And something like a monitoring activity or some form of training, unless you actually use it, it's not going to change anything about that risk. So if we just walk through this flowchart, if you go in on the nice amber start area, okay, and you say, okay, so does this task, process, activity just collect data? Okay, and that might be a thermometer or it might be an inspection, for example. If that's the case, great, it's very important data collection, but again, unless you use it, it's not going to actively do anything to the risk. The second diamond that we have here is, does this task, object, etc. only provide guidance as to what to do with that particular piece of information or what to do in that situation? And this might be a procedure or it might be training. Again, great, it's really important guidance, but unless you actually use it, it's not going to change anything. That then takes us into our third diamond that we have here, which is where your task, process, etc. actively changes something about that risk. And this might be something like a pressure release valve, or if the control is more behavioural related, so physically getting up and leaving the room when that fire alarm is sounding, for example. Now, often those controls require the guidance activity and the data collection activity to actually work in their own right, but that's what takes us into the active control space. Now, when we find those active controls and we put them in place, those are the type of things that can move us actively back into our zone of tolerance. And the reason why I guess I belaboured this point is because all too often across mining, oil and gas, etc., do we find ourselves doing lots and lots and lots of work around data collection and guidance and support, rather than using that time and effort on the verification side for the active controls, which is where we can actually make a difference.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, so that's where you start to see risk management adding value rather than administrating a control environment.
Yeah.
Okay, just to move on a little bit here, John, could you reflect on any comments of how this would be implemented in Iceland, please?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, your plug for Isometrix, I've said it, we are an integrated risk management software. For certain customers, not every customer, for certain customers, we provide that true integrated, multidisciplinary risk management approach. Some companies aren't ready for that, right? Some companies keep ERM as ERM. They might categorize those things and pull it. Some are focused on social sustainability and environmental impact assessments and social sustainability risk management or social risk management. Some are focused on environmental health and safety. But you know, the customers who really leverage Isometrix to its full potential embrace and have an integrated risk mindset on which they run their business, not just a department of their business. And that is the Satarla sort of view of integrated risk management. And again, addressing the question that came in there, you can see that safety and environmental forms a part of that. The other thing that's pretty clear in there as well is that it kind of follows a little bit of that plan, do, check, act, review sort of Deming cycle within that middle part, right? Defining the context and objectives, the planning part, assessing those risks, managing those risks, monitoring and reviewing, and that continuous cycle that covers all of those, which, as I mentioned, there's a reason why Isometrix and Satarla are partners. We share the same mindset. The left-hand pie chart there is how Isometrix views that. Everything in Isometrix starts with a central risk and control taxonomy. Understand that sometimes you move outside of where you're supposed to be. That's an event or an incident, a materialization of a risk. And then there's a variety of different monitoring activities as well to try to support those. But we really do try to take the focus on, you know, active control monitoring. Again, the plan, do, check, act cycle there just looks at it as a different way. As I mentioned a few times, right, the ability to organize that within Isometrix itself in that same plan, do, check, and act process. And then I showed you one sort of dashboard output already, but I'll show you another dashboard within here, is that, again, the ability to measure and monitor those things and hopefully take action on those. Of course, none of this does any good, as Sarah said, if you don't actually have those processes set up to begin with. So a software tool is fantastic, but a software tool will do no good for you if you don't actually have your risk management and your risk and control and your risk appetite tolerance and all those processes defined to begin with. You're just going to try to use a piece of software that isn't going to do any good for you. So yeah, hopefully that makes a good bit about the connection there between what Satarla does and what Isometrix does as well.
Great. Thank you for that, John. Yeah, and it's important to kind of point out that's where we find we can really add value by collaborating with like-minded organizations around this topic. So bringing it back to the risk appetite conversation we've had. So in summary, we have covered a very complex topic in a very short space of time. And I can see my scribes in the corner here being busy writing down lots of questions. So I'm looking forward to the off-camera debate, which will commence soon. So just to kind of wrap this up, we have touched on quite a few different areas around risk appetite, a few different topics. So what is risk appetite and tolerance? How can you put it to work in an organization? How can technology help and support you there? So before we formally begin the sort of question and answer session and turn the recording off, Sarah, any closing comments from you? And then John immediately after you.
Yes, so I think from my perspective, risk appetite and tolerance can actually help bind together where you have your health and safety risks, your financial risks, your reputational risks, etc., because it helps you to be able to balance what are often conflicting requirements to say actually in what direction do we really want to push or take our organisation as a whole. So for me, that's where the real value sits, as well as using it as those trigger points to then instigate some form of action going forwards.
Great, thanks. And John, any closing comments, please?
If you're interested in that case study that we presented, go to the website and download that case study as well.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today in this Risk Appetite and Tolerance webinar put on by Satarla and Isometrix. And we look forward to speaking with some of you soon.